The topics expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization show. I'm your host, Ira Wolf, here with my co-host today, Keith Campagna, and our sponsor is JobVite and Success Performance Solutions. So we want to thank them very much. Today, we will be joined in just a few minutes by Reed Shaffner, Vice President of Product Strategy at Cornerstone OnDemand. Last week, we also had a guest from, our guest was from Cornerstone. So, but prior to that, Reed had started a very cool company called WorkPop. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And we are recording live today. You can call us at 561-623-9429 if you want to talk to Keith or me or Reed, or have some other topics on your mind that you'd like us to address. The number again is 561-623-9429. Before we get to Reed, let's do our little recap of the week. Keith, what's the biggest story of your week?
Well, the biggest story for me is that we're building more and more with the new acquisition at JobVite, where we brought on RollPoint, telemetry, and Canvas. And it's just fascinating to be inside of an organization. You know, I was talking to a colleague of mine who I hadn't talked to, Ira, in a long while. And I basically said, you know, I'm in this recruitment HR tech company out of Silicon Valley. We just got $200 million from a PE firm. And it sounds so, it's like kind of surreal to be in the middle of the storm with it right now. It's just wild to be able to watch how it's growing and be a part of all that. And I just found out it was confirmed our last year's numbers were as great as they ever were. So it's just a really fun time to be at JobVite right now. So I'm taking it all in and trying to spread the word as much as possible.
Yeah, and I don't have, obviously we got a ton to talk about. We're going to be talking about people analytics today and a huge subject, based on everything that's out there. The two number one trends that consistently come up in the HR space happens to be candidate experience or people analytics.
Sure.
I mean, and so we're going to probably touch base on both of those today. But Reed also, I think, is an investor. He just sold his company, WorkPop. So, we'll be able to talk a little bit about what's happening in this space, too. No big problems. For me, it's basically been the calm before the storm. I've got my speaking schedules ramping up. Got a big one coming up next week, which is just the opportunity today. One of the reasons I'm really excited to have Reed on because it's the topic's people analytics. Yep. I'm going to be presenting to the Lehigh Valley SHRM group next week. And when I talked to their admin earlier in the week, I think there's 90 already signed up, 85 or 90. And that's pretty crazy. Usually they get about 50 or 60. So
it's happening, dude. It really is. There's this amazing wave that it doesn't feel like it's going to slow down. Doesn't it feel like the attention to all of this is building that much more?
Hey, I read the book on that. Remember? VUCA.
That's right.
Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
How often do you get to use the line? I wrote a book about
more
that.
And more often. More and more often. And thanks again. I think what got me juiced again. Sometimes I think everybody's heard it, but when I spoke when I was with Robbie a couple weeks ago, Robbie Gulry down at the Leadership Atlanta. Here's an audience of 90 leaders, young leaders. I asked how many people, have MBAs. Most of them were college grads. Most of them were pretty young and savvy. And, I said, how many people heard of VUCA? And I think like 3 hands went up. So
right.
Obviously there's a lot of people that need to read my book yet, but
or
a lot of other things or watch my TED Talk. So.
I'll have you know, I have been promoting your book and in
Oh, I
very,
know. You're my
very
groupie.
many small
I just told
circles.
somebody this morning, you're my groupie. So,
Yeah,
hey, by the way, one other
true.
cool thing, and it just started. I got to remember what it is, but I just actually signed up, starting to use text, talking about text, and people can sign up for our alerts now by text. So you can even test this out if you want. The short code is 64600. That's 64600. And just type in GGG for Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization, GGG, and you get an email acknowledging that, and then we'll be able to send out our future guests and alerts and some if we have any offers from sponsors or whatever we do. So yeah, just did that this morning.
Nice.
So that'll be fun.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so other than kind of the deep dive into people analytics, and I got excited about that topic again. Usually I really enjoy talking about the candidate experience and all those issues, but this was really timely.
Yeah, and I just can't get enough of the fact that we look at like the big picture, right? The yin and yang of what's going on with the future of work. Tell me, it couldn't be more or better defined as the kind of things we talked about with Summer last week. And the kind of things we're going to talk about with Reed today, right? We've got the art of the human element. How do we put the human back in human resources when we've got all of these analytics we have to look forward to? There's a lot of moving parts going on now, and it's pretty wild to be a part of it.
Yeah, and that's actually a great segue to start bringing Reed in, because one of sort of give away the ending, but one of the slides that I just built was. Important to know is everybody thinks that data takes the having all this data, having all this analytics is going to take the human out of the company, out of HR. And the reality is judgment is still incredibly important. It's not certainly predictive analytics is designed to take all the data you have and look for trends and look for pathways and get better guidance. But you still need judgment, and you still need the input and the acceptance from people. And companies that are hesitant to use analytics are going to be in trouble because they don't have them. So it's how do you use them and how to use them properly. So we've kind of touched on this, that there's people the top two trends are probably candidate experience and people analytics. So they do go hand in hand, like chicken and But I guess which comes first, is the chicken or the egg? Do you do the candidate experience and then work track it, or do you have the analytics and improve it? I don't know what the best answer is, other than doing both simultaneously. So, over the last couple of months, you and I, Keith, we've met some really, really good people. We're in the 6th month of the show. It seems to get better and better every single week. And we've been spending most of our time on, as I said, candidate experience, workplace violence, sexual harassment. But we've touched on metrics and reporting. Right. Reporting is just not enough anymore. But because we live in this real-time world, this VUCA world, where everything, what happened last month, sometimes what happened yesterday is just history. It's another news cycle. So it's exciting to bring on Reed. Reed, welcome to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, appreciate it. So a couple things. By the way, you've got the greatest, and this is from, according to my wife, you've got the greatest Twitter name, Redacted. So we heard a lot about redacted these days. So your Twitter name is Redacted, right?
That is correct.
Yeah, and that's one of my wife's favorite words these days.
Why is that?
We watch too much news. So I can assure all the listeners today there won't be anything redacted from the show. but great to have you. So I thought that was pretty funny. So you had a company called WorkPop. And I went up and looked, and actually I just sent it off to one of the consultants I work with. one of your clients or former clients, I guess, I assume maybe they came over with you to Cornerstone. They were. She had asked me a few years ago, it's maybe 5 years ago. They were starting to look at some recruitment software, wanted to do a better job, and it looks like they landed up at WorkPop, your company, right?
Which
I think it was Giant Eagle.
The grocery chain. Absolutely.
Yeah, out in Pittsburgh area. She was from Pittsburgh. She knew him real well, and she tried to get me in there, and but they needed something bigger than what we serviced, and so it was ironic when I pulled up your the site to do a little get a little background on you. I saw that pop up right away, so I sent her an email, and so small world. So tell us about the transition from WorkPop to Cornerstone.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Cornerstone is a gigantic multinational public company, and I think anytime you're coming from that, from more of a startup environment, it's a really exciting change. In my past jobs, whether it's at Zynga running games like Words with Friends and Farmville, I've been in that environment, but I think getting to take our technology and deploy it into the hands of tens of millions of users is a really exciting thing. And so, I think it's been a really fun transition for us.
Yeah, super. So the reason I reached out to you, I reached out to Charles Coy, and he said, hey, he was gonna get somebody, and he found you. So I don't know if he owes you one or you owe him or whatever, but it was exciting. Especially when I saw what your background was. A lot of buzz, with people analytics. I guess one of the things is there's a lot of confusion because it seems to be this really super broad term. So, when somebody asks you or when you're describing people analytics, what's your definition of it?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think we're seeing this today with a lot of terms in the HR space where maybe the definitions are confusing, right? We hear things like machine learning and AI used interchangeably, and you have this broad term, people analytics. And I think that the reality is that it could encompass quite a bit, right? And I think at the very basic level, if I think about things like engagement surveys to users that just ask, how are you doing? Or maybe it gauges employee NPS. It's still analytics about your people. I think, as we look forward and as we look at kind of the more modern definition, I think what a lot of people are referring to is at a broad level, it's anything that helps managers, executives, people within the business make better decisions about their employees or workforce. And I think, though, more and more, you're seeing it. People are applying statistics, technology to large sets of talent data, which lets people make those decisions. It's a new domain for most HR departments. And I think, look, you're seeing new technology come into it, again, whether it be that machine learning, whether it be that AI. But ultimately, I think at the end of the day, you could just define it as it's using statistics and technology applied to large sets of data so that you can make better decisions for an organization, and specifically better decisions about your people.
So, there's numbers at different levels. I know we talked about, I guess, Deloitte. Josh Berson's obviously, a big guy in this space. And when he was at Deloitte, they came up with the 4 levels of maturity of that. I just saw another one the other day. I think it came from CIPD. I think it was a little easier to understand. And they talked about, so many companies have data. They just collect it. And then the next step up is reporting it. But it's all retroactive. It's all what happened last month. And what companies want to move to, and I get this all the time because I'm in the employee assessment, is how can we predict that this employee is going to be a good employee for us? And that's really the predictive analytics. But are you seeing that companies are trying to make this big leap from just collecting data to, predicting the future? How, what are the steps? I guess let's talk about what are the steps somebody should go through, because I think people are trying to, run the marathon when they haven't even figured out how to walk yet.
Yeah, those are all great questions. And I think, first to that model that you just talked about, right? This idea of, hey, the first step is you got to have the data. Second step is you have to report on it. Third level is, hey, can we do things that allow us to predict who's going to be a good employee or who's going to retain longer or who's going to cause problems in the organization. I actually think that there's a step that even exists in between that, which is, do we have the right data, and what is the quality of the data that we have? I think that that's something that in all of this, gets overlooked. Even when you have a large organization, it doesn't mean that you're collecting data in the same ways across all of your employees. It doesn't mean that the quality of that data is good, meaning that maybe there's gaps in what you have, right? If you think about potential scenarios, like I want to be able to predict who will be a good fill for this role that just opened up from my internal employees, very few companies even have things like the full work history, of all their employees that have come in, stored in a central place. And so I think that there's a really important first step there that is just like, do we have quality data? Now, as far as the steps to get there, I think this is also it's a dangerous thing for us to say there's a one-size-fits-all sort of recipe to what you should be doing, right? If you're a 100 or 200 person, let's say, manufacturing firm, your data availability is going to be very different than a company like, say, Coca-Cola, who might have hundreds of thousands of employees. And so I think the steps that you're going to want to take and the solutions that you're going to have to look at are heavily predicated based on the organization size, based on the types of things that you want to learn. But I think that the most important step in getting to this is really being clear on one or two questions that you want to answer. Instead of, saying, man, let's collect all the data and boil the ocean, which I think is a lot of times what happens is we've got all this exciting data. Suddenly someone's dumping it into a system. They don't really know what question they're trying to answer. A few months go by and you don't have that payout. So I think if there's one overarching piece of advice, it's start with one or two really focused questions that you want to answer.
Yeah, and that's something that I've been, and again, in my presentation, I found, trying to help people, give them examples of that. One is, even, I guess, looking at turnover, that's always a big one. Can companies predict the turnover? Another one might be, I always throw this one out as the ultimate question, and I guess I'll ask if you agree with it or some others examples of that. To help people focus, because there's a lot of companies that need to know who's at risk for leaving. Which are their top people? Is at risk for leaving, and even when they're going to leave. Go ahead.
I was going to say, let me piggyback off of that. One of the things that we talk about all the time with our clients, and we provide it for the clients, but on the prospective side, it's that idea of predictive analytics. How long is it going to take for you to fill a spot using, our clients leverage our entire database to get those industry averages by, geography. So the value is so astronomically advantageous to any one company that's sitting maybe inside of a region or inside of an industry where they're just trying to figure out not only what employees are at risk, but what do we got to do to make sure that we manage that risk?
Yeah. So, Reed, what are you seeing as if you were to tell somebody that was interested in starting with this, rather than saying, "Hey, we have all this data, and I wonder what we can find." And I think that's I think when people hear that, it's like, well, we're going to hire somebody to process all the data and see what trends exist, which is what you're saying is not the way to do it. What are you seeing are some of the most popular questions or that people are focused on?
Yeah, and I can think of a few. I mean, you guys definitely outlined, I think, some of the ones that we certainly see, right? How can I predict who will stay longer at my company, right? So who's going to retain? How do I invest in those people? Are my best people going to stay, or are they likely to churn? I think you guys brought up a great one, which is, how long is it going to take me to fill roles? How much is it going to cost to fill those roles, right? And if I can predict that I'm going to have roles open up, and I know it takes me 90 days to hire that maybe particularly skilled developer, I better start recruiting for that role now, if I don't want to have vacancies. I think another one we see a lot that I think is really impactful is, which pay structures improve performance, right? This is a big one. I think throughout organizations, we think about incentives and how do we drive the behavior we want. Very often we don't measure whether or not that pay is driving the behaviors we want. And so, I think that's one we see a lot. I think, the inverse of are my are my, not the inverse, but corollary to the are my good employees going to retain is what factors lead to more engaged, high-performing employees. So, when I look at the people in my organization that are high-performing, what are they doing differently? Are they, consuming more learning content? Who in the organization are they interacting with? So that's certainly one we see. I think perhaps a good, easy starting question, because it has a very binary answer, is there pay equity among my employees, right? And I think that's a great one that we love to see, is using technology to determine if people are paid equally. Another one is, what skills do I need to hire for to ensure that there's success within a job position, right? So if I look at past hires that we've made there, what skills actually correlate with success in the role? I think if you look in the Cornerstone client base, we have people using our machine learning and some of our other predictive analytics capabilities to do this today. We have people using it to identify seasonal needs in hiring. So when do we tend to need to ramp up our hiring because we have gaps? We see people use a lot of our tools for succession planning. So how do we identify those people in our organization that we think are going to move on to bigger roles? And then, being able to do things like just compare employee performance by location, by tenure, by manager. So there's really a lot out there, I think, that's exciting that people are doing with these analytics. And I think it's really just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, absolutely. As you were describing that, my mind's already off, and it's like, okay, you ask one question, and then there's a million other questions that go there, and I guess it's either the tip of the iceberg or a rabbit hole. Which how everyone wants to look at it, but to me, it's exciting because it gets people in the right direction, and I've seen that when I'm speaking to groups too. I mean, it seems very daunting and scary, and once you get them over the kind of the hurdle of thinking how unethical this is, because we're going to be able to predict every little movement of somebody, and then all of a sudden it becomes a great tool that people can use because it doesn't help anyone when you've invested in an employee and they leave, or you make a wrong hire. Sure, it costs the company money and it's a pain in the butt, but you haven't done any good favors to the employee either. And so this actually, using it properly, people analytics really helps everyone.
Yeah, I think absolutely.
Yeah. So a couple of things come up to mind. One is, the three of us on this call all, and everybody we probably associate with on a daily basis, agrees that, people analytics is the way to go, even if it's just baby steps. But so the buzz is high, but adoption's slow, and you're pretty, you're dealing with much larger organizations than I personally do on a day-to-day basis. But what's holding back the companies that really do have the resources? They have the resources to either delegate or hire people to do it, but the adoption's still slow. What are you seeing? What's the biggest hurdles?
Well, I think that there's a few things. I think one, the promise of the technology has not yet met reality in a lot of cases, right? I think a lot of times the types of things we can do are exciting, but due to that data quality and that data availability, maybe a lot of the things that people are out there promising aren't there. I think people also have to change their mindset. It was just brought up this idea that, we're able to predict things like how long it's going to take to hire for a role because we're able to look across the data of all of our customers, right? And this idea that we might combine data across businesses, I think, is a foreign concept to people that they have to get comfortable with. I think there's the reality too is there's, I think, some budgetary concerns, right? I was trying to pull some data before the call, and there's a survey by the TATA consultancy, and they found that just 5% of big data investments go to HR, right? The group that typically manages people analytics.
We're reading the same stuff, Reed. I have one of my slides pulled up, and that's actually the number 2 bullet point I have on my slide. So
it's funny.
Look, that budget, I think that low percent of budget leads to a few things, right? One, it means that people don't necessarily have the tools, but I think that the other challenge is still we're catching up in other departments of the company in terms of data literacy, right? So do we understand the difference between things like correlation and causation? Do we really have a good grapple on, hey, is this sample that I'm looking at big enough to make the inferences that I want? And so I think the good news is I think organizations are somewhat aware. that they might not be there yet, right? Another stat I'll throw at you, Deloitte, said that only 9% of companies believe that they have a good understanding of which talent dimensions drive performance in their organization. So I think it's also, people are just starting to form their hypotheses. They're just starting to build that data literacy. We're really at the start of the money flooding into this space. And so I think that those things are all challenges, but I think that we'll see them start to fall in the coming years.
And Ira, let me add to that a little bit, because Reed, I agree with everything you're saying, and I'd like to combine the disruption, the disruptive behavior of the talent marketplace. I think that the combination of everything Reed just said, but then you think about how if I'm a successful, progressive HR leader in an organization, that means that I purchase software. That means I move the needle in terms of identifying initiatives and goals, and I probably train my team how to do it as well. So I'm probably, based off of the way we see people behaving, I'm probably going to get another job in 3 years, and my team may very well turn over in 5 years. So that one company that had 6 HR people is now 6 companies with 6 different HR people that have this. So I get the sneaky suspicion that because of this tight labor market, people are going to start leveraging their experiences. So when they get to other organizations, they can make that kind of change as well. Does that play a role, you think?
Yeah, I think that definitely resonates. I think the other thing that we're going to see happen is I think that employees are going to pull this into the organizations more. As the employee base becomes more technical, as it requires more technical skills, I think you're going to have employees demanding analytics into, how do I succeed in my career? We mentioned the holy grail of how do I retain employees? How do I retain my star performers? I think an equally, big goal is how do I deliver objective performance ratings, right? How do I make sure that I'm evaluating people based on analytics and really based on their impact to the company? And I think the other thing that's really going to move this forward is employee acceptance. I think we're going to see this shift where today maybe they're scared that this will be a conflict with the human element, with human interaction. I think we're going to see a shift where instead employees are actually demanding these insights, demanding this data, and demanding this sort of objective clarity in their day-to-day work.
Hey, you are listening to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization show. We're talking all about people analytics and keeping the H in HR. We have our guest today is Reed Shaffner from Cornerstone OnDemand. He's the Vice President of Product Strategy here with my co-host, Keith Campagna. And we're going to take a short break. We're going to hear from our sponsors, JobVite and Success Performance Solutions. Stay right where you are. We will be back in 2 minutes.
Behind everything you're searching for is something you're actually looking for. When you search with the Real Yellow Pages, you get more than a contractor. You get a whole new curb appeal. It's not just getting directions to a dry cleaner with YP.com. It's rescuing an old favorite from the back of the closet. And it's more than finding a locksmith with YP.com on your mobile. It's getting to sleep in your own bed. Whatever it might be, there are more ways to search and more ways to find exactly what you're looking for with the Real Yellow Pages, YP.com, and YP.com on your mobile, only from AT&T.
What's up, everyone? This is Keith from the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization show, powered by JobVite. JobVite knows career paths are made by people, not by open job requisitions. JobVite's platform ties recruitment marketing directly to applicant tracking and onboarding, creating continuous candidate engagement that effectively connects recruiters with qualified passive candidates. Used by over 50,000 recruiters placing over 1 million jobs, JobVite's platform impacts every company in every industry. Check us out at jobvite.com.
Listen carefully. Up to 9 out of 10 job candidates visiting your company career page leave before completing an application. You heard that right. 90% of candidates who want to apply for a job at your company don't. That's just plain crazy, especially in today's tight labor market. Candidate experience matters. Stop turning candidates away. Let Success Performance Solutions help. Call us at 800-803-4303 or register at successperformancesolutions.com/W4CY. Schedule a no-obligation consultation and get special access to insider tips to recruit faster and hire smarter.
Hey, welcome back to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization show. I'm your host, Ira Wolf, with my co-host, Keith Compagna. And we've got Reed Shaffner from Cornerstone OnDemand. He's the VP of Product Strategy. And during the break, we were learning all about his background, worked for some really, really cool companies. I guess the one that I'm most familiar with was Zynga. And it's kind of developed some games out there. Reed, it was what, Cafe? What was the name? What was the
Cafe World?
Cafe World, yeah.
Hey,
Run
Reed,
your virtual cafe.
Yeah.
Real quick, before we move on, I have to take advantage of this scenario and ask Reed a direct question he might be able to help me with. Several years ago, I was doing Christmas shopping, and I go into a game store, and I saw a actual board game called Words with Friends, the board game. And since that day, I've been wondering, how is it that Scrabble didn't sue you guys? How did that happen? I looked at I thought the whole time, how it's the same thing. What happened there? It was interesting to see that you guys were able to move into the hardware industry as well. And that was
you're assuming they didn't sue. I would point out that the differences between the rules are subtle but important. There are actually differences to the gameplay between Scrabble and Words with Friends, and I think in many cases, well, it ultimately evolved into a board game. Obviously, the success of Words with Friends came because of that, right, based gameplay. But I think you assume that there weren't lawsuits. I don't know if that's the case.
Yeah, which also ties in pretty well to that we went from board games, a lot of physical board games to mobile to board games, which is what our whole conversation is. Hey, Reed, before we took a break, this is just for everybody. Some of the other stats that I pulled up for when I was doing my research, not for the show, but also the presentation. And it goes back to one of the hurdles that we talk about. So one is 71%, and this is from IBM, 71% of human capital management recognizes that, or 71% of companies, CEOs, recognize that human capital is a key source of competitive advantage. But then you mentioned only 5% actually invest in the data. But a couple other things were interesting too. Just a little over half, 52% of HR practitioners stated their organizations use data, but out of that, only just about half of those have access to all the data. So, the number one challenge seems to be within organizations. Not that the data is not there, and you mentioned about the quality of data, but even getting access to data. Across departments, because HR collects it, but do they have all the payroll data? Do they have the business analytics data? Do you agree? I mean, is that as significant as an issue? And any suggestions what companies can do other than getting a seat at the table and addressing it?
There's a lot of great points in there. I would take a step back and I'd say, is it really about access to the data, or is it about access to the insights? For me, I actually don't know that everyone in the organization needs to or should have access to all the raw data, right? I think that the bigger thing is, can we give them prescriptive insights, prescriptive analytics that make it such that they don't need to spend their time digging into the data? I think when we think about how we're trying to build Cornerstone and a lot of the analytics products that we're investing in, the question I ask myself is, how do we use technology to empower people to see the trends that they need to see, so that they can spend time delivering that message to and coaching people based on those trends? I think we're failing with where technology is at, is we're asking our HR partners to say, hey, go into this reporting function or dump something into a CSV and you go pivot these numbers 73 different ways and see if you can find out what they mean. So for me, it's more a question about, do people have access to the right insights versus they need to have access to all the data in their organization.
So that brings up a point, and I was thinking, I guess, at a higher level, because, and again, to start this ball rolling, who needs to be involved in this, to have access to it? And I agree with you. I don't think every HR practitioner or every business analyst needs access to every piece of data. It's more the insights, but someone does. I mean, somebody needs to be able to put the data together to get the insights. So, what's the, who needs to be involved in this? What are the, should everybody go out and hire a data scientist, or are there other types of people that should be on these teams?
Yeah. I mean, that is a fantastic question, right? I think that, this is going to be a partnership between a lot of groups, right? If you think about the role that IT plays in this, there certainly might be the need to bring in data from a number of disparate systems, right? I might want to pull in data from my time and attendance system, and I might want to pull in data from, line of business applications that we've written in-house. So I think IT can play a very important role in this. I think at this point in time, particularly for large organizations, I think really hiring a data scientist is a great investment, right? Having someone who is the skills and the know-how to be able to dig into this data and produce insights that are reliable, that don't overstep what you're able to see from the data is a great investment to make. I don't think any organization is gonna regret that. And then I think the other key players in this are really three. One, it's obviously the HR department. They have to be involved because they have to, kind of have a pulse on what problems their organization needs to solve. I think that the executive team within the organization, the business leadership, needs to be involved to kind of set the direction in terms of at the highest level, what questions do we need to answer as an organization. And then I think management, day-to-day management, and this is something I see a lot in working with our large customers. A lot of times just that frontline manager is forgotten in terms of thinking about who needs to have access to this data in some way, who needs to participate in the questions they need answered. And really those frontline managers a lot of times are really key to be involved in this discussion. So I think it's a partnership between all those groups. I think there's tools out there that can make this easier, right? A lot of times maybe you don't have money for a data scientist, and so then, investing in whether it's a recruiting suite or investing in a unified talent management platform that can automate a lot of that analysis can really help.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're, again, going back to a couple things we've basically touched on. This goes, and I think you just kind of summarize it, but this goes much broader than just HR, because it's not just about HR data. The ultimate goal is to be able to provide business insights, right? I mean, isn't this the pathway to get HR that seat at the table? Because with human capital and turnover and, costs so integral into this, how are you seeing this aligned with kind of a broader strategy, business strategy?
That's another fantastic question. Look, I think at the end of the day, human resources insights, our people insights, are business insights, right? They're not distinct things. They're at the core of our businesses. And so, I think particularly in a market like we're in now, where unemployment, at least in the U.S., is basically continues to be at relatively close to all-time lows. You have these incredibly hard to hire for skills, whether it be on the technical side, whether it be on the creative side. I think the data around how to retain and bring in great people has never been at the premium that it is now. And so, I think that there's demand from all parts of the business, and ultimately people data is business data.
So have you seen any good, that you can share? Obviously, some of this may be confidential, but have you seen any really good case studies, that you can give an example of, or success stories of utilizing predictive analytics?
It's interesting. I think that I'll give you one. I think the companies, public ones at least, the companies that are doing really exciting stuff with this, and I think this tells you kind of where we are in the maturity cycle. You look at some of the things that Google has done with this in terms of, in-house and written in their own ways, but in terms of pay equality. I think they actually just released an announcement that had some surprising results. They released an announcement that they were actually underpaying some men within one of their software teams. Totally counterintuitive insight, right? Now, they've also used that to detect areas where they were underpaying women or underpaying minorities. And I think that you have, these big tech companies are doing some really exciting things. I think you also have people coming out and they're admitting when they get things wrong, right? A few months ago, Amazon came out and said, hey, we were using machine learning to try and predict who would make good developers. And they said, we messed up, right? Our algorithm had some unintended bias in it. It was favoring men. And so I think, I see companies, especially in the high tech space, they're getting these early wins. And I think they're also being honest about where it's not working. And I think it's been really exciting to see some of those stories come out. I think you do have people getting wins within our customer base. Some of them choose to keep it confidential. I think at a high level, we are seeing people have a lot of wins around sort of predicting hiring needs, predicting time to fill. We're also seeing a lot on the succession side, where people are able to, just essentially by aggregating all of the data that they have on their employees, the performance data, the resume that they used when they applied, their competency assessments as they head into performance reviews. We're actually starting to see some exciting stuff where we can predict who might be a good backfill for a role, or who might be good to step into a leadership position in the future. And we've seen some good wins on that front as well.
Do you see this, so we talk about Google, we talk about, you deal with a lot of large clients. I know Keith is mostly in the medium space. I'm dealing with most of these small. When I talk to small privately owned businesses, this is scary stuff. I mean, and so again, I'm always looking for what some of those baby steps are. And as you brought up, they read the headlines of, hey, Google got it wrong, Amazon got it wrong. Some of these big names got it wrong, so we're not ready to do this yet. But they have to. I mean, they just got to become better at it. So, what are some of the, I guess, things that you would advise a small business, or somebody in HR working for a small business, what's the first thing they need to do, and then what should they avoid? It's the two sides of the coin.
Yeah, again, great questions. Again, I think look, one, I'll go back to this. They need to have one or two questions to start that they want to answer, right? And I think you threw out a stat a second ago that 52% of organizations say that they use data at all, right? So that means 48% of them aren't. So I think the first thing to start with is just what are one or two questions that I want to answer. And I'd start simple with those questions, right? I wouldn't say, wow, what is the factor most likely to predict whether someone's going to turn over? That's a hard question to answer. It's also a question that you need a lot of data to answer that you may not have as that smaller business, right? So I think one or two questions that you want to answer. I think the second step on that is what data might I need to answer those questions, right? So what do I think I'm going to need to be able to answer that? And then I think the step beyond that is, do I have that data, right? So what is the availability of it? What percentage of my employees do I have that data for? Is it 10%, 50%? If it's low, how do I make sure that I get that data on all my employees? Do I buy software to track it? Do I run a survey, right? And a lot of times people want to race to the most complex solution. In a small business, the first way to start collecting data, go spin up a Google form, collect data from people. And then, as you look at the availability, what's the quality? Sometimes you just have to manually audit the data. Can I trust it? Does it complete? Does it answer all the questions that I needed? And then and only then do I think you get into that first analysis of those first one or two questions that you really want to answer. I think the other thing that small businesses need to think about, particularly as they think about predictive analytics and machine learning and AI, is again, they have to be comfortable with pooling their data to get the same level of predictive insights that the big guys are going to get. If you're a 100-person company, you simply a lot of times don't have the volume of data to make some of these predictions, particularly if your turnover is low, as an example, right? So you need to rely on sort of broad trends across other businesses like you, and there's software out there to make that possible. But I think the last one, and this is just a word of caution, is be realistic about what you can achieve relative to the data that you have, right? And be wary of anyone who's out there kind of selling you that snake oil solution that says, oh, you have 100 employees. If you just deploy this, we'll be able to predict which of them are going to be star performers for the next 100 years. Be wary of those solutions that promise you everything.
Agreed. I'll throw one more thing to that, and is that you look at those 100-person companies, those 200-person companies, they all already have some sort of a financial ERP that gives them their financial data so that they can make good business decisions. So it really is that opportunity for the HR team to sit down with their finance leaders, learn how to justify the investment in buying software that they can help drive their development.
Yeah, no question. Hey, thanks, Keith. And thank you, Reed. Hey, we're like 5 minutes from pretty close to wrapping up the show here. And we covered a lot of this. Is there any, here's the question. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you think that, again, whether it's a company that's well on its way or a company that's just saying, hey, we need to get on the ball here. What's your kind of final words of wisdom about people analytics?
Wow, that's tough. I mean, I think, look, it's coming. It is going to redefine the way that we build out HR. If I had one passing thought, I think if you work in an HR department today, whether you are just starting your career in HR or whether you're the CHRO of a massive enterprise company, I actually think now is a great time to invest in yourself. Take classes, statistics classes, take analytics classes, there's a lot of great content out there. Whether it's in your own learning platform or whether it's just on Google, really go out there and make yourself a data scientist. I think that data literacy piece, no one who is right now pursuing a career in HR is going to regret that in a year, in 5 years, or 10 years. And so I'd say invest in yourself and really go take the time to become a statistician, become someone who's really literate in the data, become someone who can ask the right questions and really understand the numbers that are being put in front of you.
Yeah, the first thing I always hear, because I think a lot of people, especially in the past, went to HR because they didn't like working with numbers. They it's, I wasn't good on math, so I went to, social work or HR or something in that regard. And that's obviously changing, but you don't have to be a PhD in mathematics to be able to do this. And some of it's just analysis. I mean, some of it's just the ability to ask questions.
Yeah, this data, these analytics, right? And I think, again, data and analytics are two different things, but these analytics, these insights, they're not the enemy. They're the way to make the lives of our employees better. And so, I think that level of just, you don't have to be a mathematician, just you want to know how to ask the right questions to make the right inferences. And I think that's a skill that is going to be great for our industry going forward.
Yeah, I'm just looking at a grid, and again, I can't remember where I pulled this from offhand, so I apologize to wherever I got it. But it says 6 skills needed for people analytics. One is data science, which you mentioned, but it's also communication. And we didn't touch on that at all, but I think that's an important part because people that can tell stories. Again, the most effective use of people analytics is not having the data, and but how do you take the data and turn it into a story, a compelling story that gets that gets management and all the stakeholders engaged?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So story, so if you're a good storyteller and you're not good in math, you still a role for you in people analytics. So, for sure. Hey, Reed, I really appreciate it. I mean, these 50 minutes always go like crazy fast. And as I told Summer last week, and a couple other guests, I start with maybe like a, figure we can get through 50 minutes of questions, and I end up with 6 hours of questions, that I'd like to pursue. So we'd love to have you back. This is going to be a continuing field to be able to reach out to you. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you if they have any questions or want to follow you?
Well, yeah, you already gave them. I'll admittedly my not used enough Twitter handle at redacted, REDD. ACTED, which I will try and do a better job of. But
I thought it was great. That's cool.
So they can follow me there, and I'm a person that I want to hear what people are dealing with all the time, and so I'll actually give out my email. It's the letter R, Shaffner, SHAFFNER at CSOD.com, and I want to hear from people, what questions they have, things that they've done that have worked. I love to get those emails.
Yeah, we're gonna, and I know you're on LinkedIn as well, so they can reach out to you there. We'll have your contact information in the blog post and on the podcast. So we'll make sure that people do it, and hopefully they will reach out. And again, this is going to be an ongoing conversation, and looking forward to continuing it.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks. It was fun.
Good talking with you.
Yeah,
good talking with you, Reed. Thank you. Yeah. Fantastic. I love the idea. I love the reality that's happening. There's so much going on, Ira, with the way that people, like the tools are just sitting there waiting for them, whether it's me on the recruiting side or Reed on the analytics or you on the Googlization side of everything. I just think it's fascinating to see what's going to happen.
Super. Well, we're sort of wrapping up another week here. As I said, the weeks seem to go faster and faster. We've had some phenomenal guests. And again, thank you, Reed. It's been great having you. Appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for filling in pretty quickly for us. When I pitched this out, we had an opening this week, and it was perfect. Thanks very much. You've been listening to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization show with Ira Wolf. I'm your host. And with Keith Campagna, I want to remind everybody, if you want to get alerts for the upcoming shows and also when the podcasts are available for rebroadcast, text to 64600. That's 64600. And just type in GGG for Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization. You get a notice, and then we'll be sending alerts. Anything that's happening with the show, our guests, the availability of podcasts, we'll be running some contests, some coupons. New releases when anything's out. Until next Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time on W4CY.com. Or you can listen to any of our podcasts on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeart, and about 20 other platforms. Until next week, this is Ira Wolf and Keith Campagna. Don't let the shift hit your plans.